So the first video in my HIV/AIDS series is concerned with how MSM, men who have sex with men in the first world, catch the virus. Before starting, I have to make a correction. The most optimistic optimists about an HIV vaccine talk about a licensed drug in 2019 as the earliest date. I said 2016 in my introductory video. They say that in 2016 large-scale effectiveness studies for a vaccine could be starting, but that does not mean that the drug is then licensed to the general public. That is the last phase of the clinical trial that is making it available to the whole population. That will be in 2019. So still a long way to go. And even if they find a good vaccine, then I have a feeling that other viruses that attack the immune system and that affect only a small part of the general human population might come. And what will they do then? Will they take another 30 years of finding a mediocre vaccine to diminish the spread of that virus rather than doing good studies on transmission? There is a certain myth around AIDS and HIV, just as there is or used to be about cancer, the cancer personality thing, and Susan Sontag even wrote a book about the mythology around diseases. And I have a feeling that the HIV thing is actually just that. There are so many different types of virus around. That it's really a multitude of entities. Well, there is some certain structure, some in the RNA of the virus. There is some stable structure there, so there is a common ground for it to call it really a single type of virus. But it's, as far as the mythology is concerned around the disease, the definition of it seems to be somehow that it is a tricky virus that changes and that avoids or evades a vaccine, and that affects only a small part of the general human population through some maybe uneasy transmission routes that have to do with social inequality or with minorities, with poverty, and so on and so on. This is what the mythological definition of the virus would be. So, also another remark to the uninitiated. I try to make these videos both interesting for the biomedical community and the so-called general audience or the general public, and so I do explain basic. If I am aware that they are not basic to the general public, then I will also try to clarify basic terms. Why do HIV/AIDS researchers and epidemiologists talk about MSM, men who have sex with men, rather than gay men or homosexuals or bisexuals? This is because there is a non-negligible number of men who have sex with men and who would never identify, even to themselves, as gay or bisexual. In Little Britain, USA, the comedy show by Matt Lucas and David Walliams, the grandmother proudly tells her grandson, if you know it, how grandpa even drilled his own glory hole in a toilet stall in the local train station. And there is this common saying that the difference between a straight and a bisexual male is a six-pack of beer. So since heterosexual men, in inverted commas, too have sex with men all the time and are at risk and are therefore at risk of becoming HIV positive, the AIDS researchers talk about MSM. The highest risk for catching HIV is, this is maybe common knowledge, receptive anal intercourse. It's associated with the highest risk. Unprotected receptive anal intercourse with a known seropositive or partner was once calculated to be 0.82%, whereas protected receptive anal intercourse with a seropositive partner was calculated to be 0.18%. So, of course, condoms do protect against transmission. Unprotected receptive anal intercourse with a partner of unknown serostatus carries a risk of 0.27% of catching HIV, and insertive anal intercourse, the giving position, has a very low, or has compared to that a rather low risk of 0.06%. Oral sex 0.04%. So there is some risk associated with insertive anal intercourse, and there is an almost negligible risk in oral sex and other practices. The vehicle of transmission is, of course, seminal fluid and blood. So please don't think magically when using a condom. The condom does not equal protection. Just as standing in front of the wash basin or the bathroom mirror and having the water running does not equal getting clean or being washed after you stand there. The condom is of little help when your hand is dripping with cum, which is somehow finding its way into the anogenital area again. Then you could have also done without the condom now as well. Now, what factors increase this way of transmission? I am now mainly referring to a rather old just to add that other bodily fluids do contain, such as urine, sweat, or saliva, do contain some number of viruses, but it's negligibly low, that number. Now, what factors increase this way of transmission? I am now mainly referring to a rather old paper by Copland et al., whose bibliographical information I give you. Of course, promiscuity. The more men you have, the more likely is it that you will meet someone who has a special gift for you. This is quite obvious and also probably not new to anyone. Other STIs, other sexually transmitted infections, are also responsible for an easier transmission. So seek treatment if you have gonorrhea, syphilis, warts, genital warts, anal warts, penile warts that are called condylomata acuminata. They are caused by human papilloma viruses, where there exists a vaccine. You can get a vaccine. It depends on your health insurance or the country you live in if it's covered or not. Chlamydia and trichomonads, or maybe even Giardia lamblia may play a role if they give you a sore anus or, from the diarrhea that they cause. Because this, what is the causal mechanism? There is, of course, that there is an open wound or some soreness, some inflammation in the genital area, through which HIV can enter the body more easily than if the skin were intact. There is also a theory that these inflamed or sore areas, where you have, for example, an ulcer from syphilis, that they are rich in CD4 positive T cells, T helper cells, and this is the main target, or one of the main targets of the HIV virus, of course. And so they find their target more easily if infection is already present in the genital area or anogenital area. This Copland study also found some very significant association with depression, with having depressive symptoms. I don't know what the causal mechanism here could be, but it might be that people who are depressed cannot defend themselves so well against sexual behavior that is risky. Although just recently they found out that people who are depressed actually make better choices than people who are not depressed, because they don't let themselves be guided so much by superficial impressions or spontaneous impressions. They think more and contemplate more about their actions. But maybe as far as the sexual life is concerned, they don't have the self-confidence or assertiveness to decide about their sexual action. Of course, you don't see whether someone has HIV or another STI on the outside, but maybe there could be some kind of causal link in that area. Recreational drug use is also associated with a higher risk, especially nitrates, alkalized nitrates called poppers, other sex drugs, Viagra, PCP, that is angel dust, phencyclidine, GHB, gamma hydroxy, butyric acid, which is liquid ecstasy. The causal mechanism for these is not too clear either. It's also that the recreational drug use among MSM is also associated with a higher risk for contracting especially hepatitis C, the hepatitis C virus. I will talk about what I take to be a possible causal mechanism in the next video, somewhat more in detail. But the main point I would like to make here in this video now is a risk factor that is almost never mentioned in safer sex information and in educational material for gay men, and that is anal bleeding, or having small tears, micro tears, or little cracks in the skin of the anus or in the mucosa of the anal canal. Yeah, that is the channel connecting the outside world to your rectum. Now, Copland et al. Asked 2,758 anal-receptive participants of HIV tests in Mexico City between 1991 and 1992 about other sexual variables, about the presence of STIs, psychological variables like depression, as I just explained, and especially about the occurrence of bleeding during or after sex. Those were the results. HIV-positive men bleed at least sometimes in half of the cases. 51.2% bleed never. Sometimes more than a third of them bleed sometimes, and half the time to always 10%. Among the HIV negative group, almost two-thirds bleed never. Quarter of them bleed sometimes, and half the time till always, 7.4%. The differences of these proportions were highly significant, statistically significant, and the differences, and these differences were also in their statistical significance comparable to the difference due to higher number, all the other risk factors, where the statistical significance was comparable to the difference due to higher number of male partners, due to the presence or history of other STIs, or of symptoms of depression. In this study, the difference of HIV positive versus HIV negative proportions was only moderately significant for the frequency of condom use. Of course, they do protect, but here, compared to the other risk factors, the high frequency of condom use, or for that matter, a low frequency of condom use, was had only a moderately significant effect as for the difference of the proportions of HIV positive versus HIV negative. Also, positive attitude towards condoms did not play that much of a role as promiscuity, STIs, and bleeding. Education. This is what the World Health Organization also recommends in Africa as the main strategy. Education, information about safer sex. But both in Africa and now in this study, it is questionable whether education or information, it's always good, but it's questionable whether it really has that much of an effect. Here, educatedness or being knowledgeable about HIV/AIDS was not at all significant for a difference between having HIV and not having it. Was not statistically significant. The statistical significance of the effect even kept being present after multivariate analysis of the various risk factors. That is, they checked whether these risk factors, some of these risk factors, are somehow linked to each other. That is, it might be the case that people who are promiscuous also tend to bleed more. That could be the case, and so bleeding only could have the appearance of an effect, where it is rather the promiscuity that is the main cause. But they checked with statistical tests whether that is the case, and the effect kept being present. So it was not really tied to or linked to other risk factors, and so only gave the appearance of it. It was a real risk factor. Evidence for an imminent role of anodermal bleeding for the transmission of HIV had been found also by a cross-section study of Schmiel et al. And by the prospective investigations by Darrow et al. And very clearly by Coates et al. In 1998, while only one longitudinal study by Kingsley et al. Did not show a positive significant correlation between HIV transmission and anal trauma. But the longitudinal nature here of this study, that is, they take a group, follow it after some years and interview them twice. First when they have the group, and they follow the group after some years and ask them again. So this longitudinal nature here could even be a disadvantage. Normally longitudinal studies are better than cross-sectional studies because they catch a change, but here they could even be disadvantageous, because making the subject aware of the risk of bleeding through the questioning could lead the subject to avoid it somehow. And furthermore, co-authors of Copland et al. Had found similarly significant correlations for other sample groups as far as bleeding during or after intercourse was concerned, not only in the sample group that they took for this published study. Therefore, Copland et al. Were quite surprised that a review of US and Mexican safe-sex educational materials for gay men, this is a quote, that, quote, a review of US and Mexican safe-sex educational materials for gay men indicated that none specifically mention or discuss rectal bleed. It's not rectal bleeding, it's anal bleeding. I don't think it's rectal that far up. Anyway, a review of US and Mexican safe-sex educational materials for gay men, they say, indicated that none specifically mention or discuss rectal bleeding during anal intercourse. And I can say that the same holds true for German safe-sex recommendations by German AIDS prevention groups. My impression is that this risk factor got lost somehow in the discussion and research about HIV transmission. And why? What is the reason? In the worst case, because of the taboo subject, the taboo nature of the correlation, or at best because of the argument that even if this is a major factor, then you can't do anything to avoid or diminish it anyway. But this argument, I think, is wrong. I can tell you, and will in the next videos, tell you how to avoid bleeding and micro tears somewhat effectively, and more effectively than is generally done. And this may, as a side effect, also enhance the quality of sexual life in the anoreceptive person. Now, I even think that this correlation, or this route of transmission or mechanism of transmission, is quite obvious actually, because if there is no real spread of HIV in the heterosexual population in the first world, then why should there be in the homosexual population? I take the vagina to be used more in the heterosexual population than the anus, because the anus is also used in the heterosexual population, of course, but there you have a choice between two entries, obviously, and so the anus will be used more among the MSM population. And so maybe, actually quite obviously, there is some characteristic of the anus that is different from the vagina, and this characteristic allows easy HIV transmission. The thing is that I simply don't believe that HIV can enter through the mucosa of the rectum that easily, because the rectal wall protects the pelvis and the abdominal cavity from all the infectious agents that are present in the feces. Feces have a concentration of bacteria of, I think, 10 to the 13th per gram. There are 10 to the 13th bacteria per gram of stool. Of course, viruses are a lot smaller than bacteria, but how should they be able to pass the rectal wall so easily when obviously they cannot pass the vaginal epithelium so easily in the heterosexual population? I don't think they just pass the rectal wall as if it were nothing. They come into the body through micro tears, through small wounds, through bleeding lesions, and these are more likely to occur in the anus or in the anal canal than in the female love channel in the front, maybe due to a different caliber of anus and vagina.